Right now, over the bloodiest battlefield Europe has seen in 80 years, the exact same attack jet is flying on both sides of the war. Russian pilots and Ukrainian pilots strapped into the identical aircraft, hunting each other across the same sky in the same machine. NATO nicknamed it the Frogfoot, and almost everyone loves to call it Russia's A-10. The resemblance is obvious: a tough, ugly, single-seat jet built to fly low and smash things on the ground. But here is what nearly everyone gets wrong. It is not a copy of the Warthog. In the same years America was building the A-10, the Soviet Union looked at the exact same battlefield problem and built a machine that looks like its cousin but was designed on the opposite philosophy in almost every way that matters. One country bet everything on a giant gun and endless patience. The other bet everything on raw speed and brute toughness. And the war in Ukraine is finally settling in wreckage. Which bet was right? This is the Sukhoi Su-25, the story of how two enemies invented the same idea at the same time, then disagreed about absolutely everything else. Start by killing the myth that gets repeated in every comment section, that the Soviets stole the A-10 and slapped a red star on it. They didn't. The Su-25 isn't a knockoff of the Warthog any more than the AK-47 is a knockoff of the M16. Two enemies simply solved the same problem at the same time. That problem was identical on both sides of the Iron Curtain. By the late 1960s, fast jets like the MiG-21 had become useless for the one job soldiers needed most: showing up low and slow to protect troops in a knife fight on the ground. Both superpowers realized almost simultaneously that they needed a machine built for nothing else. In 1969, the Soviets ran their own competition, inviting their great design bureaus to compete. Sukhoi's entry, a private venture prototype called the T-8, beat out a rival from Ilyushin and won. It first flew in 1975 and entered service in 1981. And, from the very start, it was built around a heritage the A-10 simply never had. To understand the Su-25, you have to understand a ghost it was built to honor. In the Second World War, the Soviet Union flew the Ilyushin IL, Tu-Shturmovik, a heavily armored ground attack plane nicknamed the Flying Tank, produced in greater numbers than any other military aircraft in history. Stalin called it as essential to the Red Army as bread. For Soviet commanders, low-altitude attack wasn't a niche the Air Force grudgingly tolerated. It was a sacred tradition. So when Sukhoi built the Frogfoot, its engineers weren't imitating America. The United States had to invent the dedicated attack plane from scratch. Russia was only rebuilding a legend it had owned since World War II. The Su-25 was the Sturmovik reborn in jet form, wrapped, like its ancestor, in a welded titanium tub of armor around the pilot. That different starting point produced a completely different machine. Where the American designers obsessed over loiter time and one devastating weapon, the Soviets obsessed over something else entirely: speed, simplicity, and the ability to fight from a muddy strip a few miles behind the front. Here is where the two planes truly split apart, and it comes down to one number. The A-10 is slow. Deliberately, famously slow. Topping out around 700 kilometers an hour because America expected to own the sky and wanted a plane that could circle a battlefield for hours, picking targets at leisure. The Su-25 is built for the opposite. It's noticeably faster, pushing close to 1,000 kilometers an hour because the Soviets never assumed they'd own anything up there. The A-10 was built to circle a battlefield for hours. The Su-25 was built to never stay over one for more than a few seconds. And both choices were right. For the wars their countries expected to fight. Soviet doctrine pictured a massive, fast-moving front with bitterly contested skies. So, the Frogfoot was made to dash in low, land a brutal hammer blow, and be gone before the enemy could react. Then drop onto a rough forward strip, get rearmed in minutes, and do it again. Less a patient gunship, more a fast knife. It was a beautiful theory. The first time it went to war, reality tested it without mercy. The Su-25 went to war before it had even officially entered service. Sukhoi was so confident it sent prototypes to Afghanistan in 1980 to be tested in live combat, flying real missions years before most aircraft are cleared to fly at all. What followed was a brutal education. Across the Soviet-Afghan War, the Frogfoot flew more than 50,000 strike sorties, earning its flying tank name by absorbing punishment that would have killed lesser jets and limping home anyway. For years, losses stayed low. Then the Americans handed the Mujahideen the Stinger, a shoulder-fired missile one fighter could carry up a mountain. Suddenly, Frogfoots were falling out of the sky, and the Soviets scrambled to bolt on flare dispensers, extra armor, and shielding so a hit engine wouldn't take the whole plane down. The cruelest irony of the Cold War: an American missile humbled Russia's Warthog in a real war, while America's Warthog sat waiting for a Soviet invasion that never came. One plane was bleeding in the mountains. The other was rehearsing for an apocalypse history quietly canceled. Decades later, both designs would finally face the same enemy, in the same war. When Russia invaded Ukraine, something unprecedented happened. Ukraine had inherited its own fleet of Su-25s when the Soviet Union collapsed. So the identical attack jet went to war against itself. For the first time in history, the same attack plane is being shot out of the sky by both sides of the same war. And both sides are bleeding. Russia has lost more Su-25s than any other type of combat jet in the war. Ukraine has lost roughly half as many of its own. The cause is the one thing the Frogfoot always feared most: a sky thick with missiles. Modern air defenses and shoulder-fired launchers have made flying low over the front almost suicidal. So the pilots adapted in a way that would horrify the plane's designers. Instead of pressing in for a proper attack, they now scream in at the height of a building. Russian crews have bragged about 25 meters, then yank the nose up and lob unguided rockets in a blind ballistic arc, turning a precision attacker into a crude flying catapult just to survive. Which forces the question this whole comparison was always heading toward. After all of it, the parallel births, the opposite philosophies, the combat records written in two different centuries. Who actually won? The patient American gun truck? Or the fast Soviet knife? The honest answer is that the question is a trap. Neither plane is better, because they were never trying to be the same thing. The A-10 is the perfect machine for a war where you own the sky and have all the time in the world. The Su-25 is the perfect machine for a war where you own nothing and have only seconds. Each is the right answer to a completely different question. But there's a colder truth underneath the rivalry. Neither plane is better than the other, Shinjouch. But Ukraine is quietly proving that the whole idea behind both of them may be running out of time. The low, slow, brave attacker that flies straight into the enemy's teeth to save the soldiers below, the dream both superpowers chased for 50 years, is exactly the kind of plane the modern battlefield was built to kill. So the next time someone calls the Su-25 a Russian ripoff of the A-10, you'll know the truth is far more interesting. Two enemies who agreed on almost nothing independently arrived at the same idea, then spent 50 years proving it in completely different skies. One built a flying gun, one rebuilt a flying tank, and history never quite let either of them have the clean victory they were designed for. The strange part is that the jets meant to replace both of them The fast, modern aircraft that were supposed to make the Warthog and the Frogfoot obsolete have their own buried history of failure. That's the story we're telling next. If you made it this far, you already know you want it. Stick around.